And welcome back, my friends. It is good to be back. It's Monday. It's the 6th of June. It's been a week and 2 days since I last did some streaming. I've got no idea how everything works again. I've busted everything, tried to fix everything, tried to make sure everything still works. But apparently it's working. If you can hear me and you can see me, it is working, which is good. Did you miss me? Maybe a tiny bit. But anyway, welcome back. And thank you very much for turning up once more on a Monday evening to talk about this amazing thing that we call writing. So it should be good fun. We'll run through the list of people because that's a thing that we do. Welcome to everybody on the stream. Now, if you are a regular, welcome obviously, because you join the chat, and it's lovely to see you, and thank you very much for all your contributions. It's always brilliant. If you're new to the stream, welcome. And you'll probably find your way around eventually. It's very, very often that I get sidetracked on this stream. Okay, so if you're expecting insightful, focused advice that can be delivered in a 10-minute slot, and then boom, you've got everything that you need, this isn't the stream, I'm afraid. We amble along, we have a good time, we make a lot of bad jokes, and we eventually get there. But hopefully there'll be something that you can glean along the way. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, let me do a little bit of my welcome thing, because I do this. Dr. Quest MD is here. The Harkooners are here. Invading Arrakis, which is always good. PSB is here. And Arrakis is here, defending against the invasion of the Harkonnens. Wintermute TV is here, of course. The X81 has crashed 4 times in the X81. GG is here. Commander Duston is here. Glenn, probably the longest ever serving member of this chat, is here. Commander Terravo, it's good to see you. Man Monksoft is here as well. The Shadow Wyvern is here. Slothy Ascent Going Well is here. Stumpy 73 is here. The Shiny Red Flag, yay, is here. Sorry, it's something we do on this stream. Dragon Eye is here, just lurking while grinding at Jameson's crash site. Good for you. Big 39 GT is here as well. Welcome on, and welcome all to the writing stream. So what we sidetracked, never happens. That's why we have a waffle emoji. Not that it does anything to me. You can spam the waffle emoji as much as you like. It won't stop me from chattering on about things. But there we go. Anyway, it's been a week. Okay, it's been a week since I was last thinking. So apologies. I think I forgot to update my Twitter to say and update my streaming schedule to say I was off. But I'm back. Because well, it was that UK thing. Okay, we get 2 bank holidays at the end of last week because the Queen had her platinum jubilee. Okay, which means she'd been on the throne for 70 years. I mean, I think I'm pretty hard done by being working for 30 years, let alone 70 years. So. Props to the Queen for sticking at it for 70 years. That's about all I can say. I'm not much of a royalist, to be honest, but I'm not an avid republicanist either. So good on the Queen for sticking at it. I mean. What can you say to a poor old dear who's had to put up with that kind of stuff, and her family, for God's sake? I mean, you wouldn't wish that lot on anybody, would you? I've been on the throne a long time, says Commander Claire Terra Firma, but not that long. So I think, from what I'm being told, she's certainly the longest reigning British monarch ever. She beat her ancestor Queen Victoria a few years ago. I think I'm right in saying that if she stays on the throne for another couple of years, she will be the longest reigning monarch in recorded history ever. So that's clearly something she wants to achieve. I would if I was in a position. So she and that would be a very, 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 very tough target for anybody else to come along and assail later. I've got to reign for 70 plus years. So I think it's 2 more years and she becomes the longest reigning monarch in the world ever, in any country ever that's ever been. I think I might be wrong on that, but there we go. So anyway, so congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen of England, and Scotland and Northern Ireland. They got that wrong on the BBC, I understood, and obviously Wales as well. Apparently there was a slight faux pas on the BBC footage. Who waved an Irish flag, which is this. For those who aren't familiar with the geography of the United Kingdom and Great Britain and everything. Now let me get this right because this is a bit confusing. Okay, so the United Kingdom, right, is England, which is the bigger part of the Isles of Great Britain. It is Wales, which is to the west. It's Scotland, which is to the north, and it's also Northern Ireland. Okay. Which is the top northeast bit of the island of Ireland. It gets very complicated to explain to anybody who isn't familiar with this. Okay, and Southern Ireland, which is southwest of the island of Ireland, isn't part of the United Kingdom at all. Okay. It's a separate country which remains in the European Union, as it happens after Brexit. And they got their flagged for some bizarre reason. I don't know why somebody didn't pick this up. They got their flag waved, and isn't it great to be British? Which has caused a small diplomatic row, apparently. So there we go. It's all very confusing. And I view this with some equanimity because I was born in Canada. Okay, I am an immigrant myself to these to the Septadile, and whilst I grew up in England, I am not English because I was born in Canada. So I can claim to be British because I have a British passport and British nationality, but I'm not English, nor am I Welsh or Scottish or Northern Irish. I'm Canadian. But I am British, but I'm not English. All right, but I speak English. And I've lived in England most of my life. So, hey, if that's got to make sense, I don't want to be sober. Very, very confusing. So I'm kind of like, wherever I lay my hat is my home, pretty much. And we've talked a bit about patriotism and nationalism in the past on this stream. So it's a confusing thing, but anyway. So yeah. The thing with Paddington Bear was very cute, but he's from Peru, so I'm not quite sure how that all fits in. The United Britain of English. I don't know. It's very, very confusing. It's very, very confusing. Anyway, congratulations to Her Majesty the Queen for reigning without any great deal of power or anything for the last 70 years. The funny thing is, she's an unelected monarch, obviously, because that's what monarchs are. Okay, it's just genetics, right? You just happen to be born into the job. But she's been consistently. I mean, depending on who you talk to, because some people really don't like the monarchy at all because it's it's an unelected body. And there's always talk about, we should get rid of the monarchy and become a republic like France. But consistently, generally, if you take a poll across the entire United Kingdom, she's been way, way, way more popular than any of our actually elected representatives as in the form of politicians. So it's like, what do we really want? let's go and wave the flags for the monarch that we didn't elect and go yay, and let's go and boo and hiss and jeer at the people we did actually elect. I don't know. It's very strange. So there we go. Anyway, right, back on with the writing. Okay, back on with the writing. So anyway, for those of you who are familiar with my stream, we do tend to waffle around a little bit. Welcome to you. If you're just lurking in the background, hello. Okay, you don't need to join in. It's absolutely fine. You want to watch this and just absorb small morsels of useful information that may occasionally get vouchsafed, and that would be quite good. Well, Elric, yes, of course. The big thing about Boris Johnson this evening is he going to get booted out by his own people? I suspect he won't, but we'll have to wait and see what's actually going on there. But that's got nothing to do with this stream this evening or what I was supposed to be talking about. So let's head vaguely in the right direction. We'll talk about researching your novel. Okay, now last time we were talking about planning novels. Okay, and this is again. Fictional writing is the only bit I know about. Okay, so I don't need. This channel needs a waffle emote. That's funny you should mention that, Low Earth Orbit. I think you'll find it has one. Somebody will put it up very, very shortly. There we go. So it's funny that Dragonlar's going, darn. So I've only written fictional novels. Okay, so if you're coming here looking for a what's the opposite of fiction? A factual novel. Then this isn't this. I don't know anything about that. I can't help you. Okay, I don't know anything about how you go research a factual. I know some people who've written them, and it looks like an awful lot of non-fiction. What's the opposite of fiction? I say it's true. I don't know. Shows how switched on I really am. Faction, maybe. Non-fiction is what we're talking about. A factual book. That looks like an awful lot of research, okay? And it looks like an awful lot of hard work. And I think you approach it entirely differently from anything that I've got any experience of writing. I've never written a factual book. It's a lot of referencing and a lot of double checking facts and all that kind of stuff to make sure you're actually correct, presumably. Whereas in fiction, you're making it up. So it's a totally different thing. So this is about fiction. And I don't like genres. Okay, I don't like genres, and we'll talk about genres another time. But if you're going to pigeonhole me a bit, science fiction, fantasy is my kind of realm, if you like. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of looking at these things. But generally, the things that you look for in a fictional book, if it's good quality, I think, are kind of genre independent. You don't need to worry about genres because genres are only really there for academics and publishers, in my mind, and probably agents too, because it allows them to go, it's that kind of book then, is it? It's a bit like that one over there. So it's just a set of categories. It's not a hard and fast thing that you're a science fiction author, therefore that's it. You can't do anything else. You can write a story in whatever genre you like, and certainly in my personal experience, I don't find them useful things because a lot of my books, can cross those genres quite easily depending on your own personal preference. So when somebody asks me, "What do you write? Are you a romance author or a science fiction author or a fantasy author?" I go, "Yes." I leave it there, and that really annoys the academics, which is just something I quite like doing anyway. And science fiction in particular, I think is really good exploring all sorts of other things. I mean, you can have a romance story that's set in space. Does that make it science fiction? Or you can have a political, intriguey story set in space. Does that make that science fiction? Or a crime thriller set in space. Does that make it science fiction? Just because it's in space doesn't mean it's science fiction, right? And just because it's set on a spaceship doesn't necessarily mean it's science fiction either. It depends what you're trying to do. So be wary of genres, okay? I've met people have come up to you about book shows and conventions and basically said to me, I'd be quite interested, but I don't read fantasy novels, or I don't read science fiction. I don't like science fiction. And it's just like, how do you know? Because if you've read one and you didn't like it, is that it? I don't like crime novels. I don't like romance novels. I don't like books with blue covers. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Okay. So don't pigeon yourself as a reader, and don't pigeon yourself as a writer either. I don't think it's a healthy thing. Genres should be banned. Okay, this is my hill, and I'm going to die on it. Genres I don't find useful. Okay. So there's a thing. But anyway, that's another topic for another time. What we're going to talk about tonight is researching your novel. Okay. This may be a big turn off to some people, because depending on how you want to go about your novel, I just want to write it, Drew. Shut up! I don't want to have to do some work before I start writing my novel. I just want to get on with it. I just want to get on and write it. And you can do that. Okay, you can do that. There may be other people on the stream going, no. I'm going to spend weeks. Spend months. In fact, I'm going to spend years researching my novel. I'm never going to get round to actually writing my novel, but I'm going to do the research. I'm going to write the research down. I'm going to do massive amounts of research. I've got a friend actually who lives not too far from me, who's been writing a book. He quotes writing a book. About 4 years, and I don't think he's actually written any of the book yet, but he's done a lot of the research. Okay. Because he likes doing the research. I don't think he actually likes writing the book at all. But the research is great fun. So be wary of research. Okay, you can do too much of it, and you can do too little of it. It can suck you into a thing. I've got some other friends who, in the fantasy writing space, who basically say, I spend all my time making beautiful maps of my landscape. I say, how's the book going then? Well, yes. You've got a lot of maps, right? Yeah. Let me show you the maps. So be wary, okay? Be wary. But you may need some research. Why do you need research? Okay, why do you need research? Well, depending on what you're writing, you may need to sound like you know what you're talking about. Yeah, that's basically what research is for. Okay, because you can make some silly mistakes that will, if a reader, what you want to avoid is a reader coming along going, this writer doesn't know what they're talking about in relation to this thing, okay, and you see this a lot for the sake of plot convenience, okay, and you can't avoid all of it because you can't be an expert in everything. But there are some sort of howlers you want to avoid, okay. The classic one in Hollywood is that everybody's password is set to password. And when you need to hack their computer, all you need to do is sit at it and go, I wonder what his password is. And then then the protagonist looks at the wall and there's a picture of his wife. He types in his wife's surname and boom, straight away into the computer. Now, there are people like that, it has to be said, but it's a very weak thing, and computer passwords don't really work like that. Because you can't keep the same password nowadays. There's lots of things like that. That basically, do your research a little bit. I'm just going to hack into that computer using my phone's Wi-Fi. So, no, that's not how it works. Okay, so that sort of thing. Password 123 exactly. Got the same combination on my luggage. What's my dog's name? So. I'm going to have to change my password now, so it's nothing nice to do. Sorry about that. I just doxed your password across the entire internet. Elwick 1024. It took a year to find a good map maker program. So you can get sucked into that stuff. Okay, and I've done making maps, and it's a huge fun. Okay, you're creating your world, and you can see it visually and all that sort of thing. So do beware of getting sucked into doing too much. You don't need to do that much, it's good to be a bit knowledgeable about the topics that you're talking about, depending on the sort of story you're writing. Now, if you want to, the thing is, and I've been guilty of this as well. You make mistakes. Okay, so the classic one that all writers have probably been guilty of at some point, if they've written any kind of action scene, right, is the one whereby you people get into a fist fight or something, and they're smacking at each other, and somebody gets knocked unconscious, okay, and then maybe a couple of minutes later, 3 minutes later, they get back up and go, ow, 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 oh, what happened to me, you know? I've done that. That, for example, isn't realistic. Okay, if you've been actually hit with a blunt instrument, whether it's the back of a gun or a baseball bat or a fist, okay, enough to have been knocked unconscious, actually you'll be in some trouble. All right, you're not going to get up 3 minutes later and go, "Oh, that was bad." Who hit me? Okay, so little things like that will add or detract from the realism of your novel. Now, depending on what you're trying to write, this may or may not be important, okay? If you're doing a very serious novel, let's say you're doing a criminal, police procedural novel, you need to have a working understanding of how police procedural stuff works. Otherwise, the people reading it are going to go, "Nope, that's that's not possible. You can't do it." Again, if you're doing a kind of like techno thriller type thing, which involves hacking computers and breaking into buildings and all that sort of stuff, then if you don't get some of that detail right, then everyone who reads it, who likes that particular subgenre, sorry about going to genres, will basically pick holes in your book rather than enjoy the story. So you have to know who you're writing for a little bit. Again, if you're like me in some of my novels going, it's a hard science fiction novel, therefore the physics has to be right, then anybody reading it who likes that sort of thing is entitled to pick holes in my explanation of physics if I've got it wrong. Okay, now you suddenly, those people accelerated to light speed in half an hour, they'd be dead unless there's some magic technology that you haven't told us about. You can't do that. Okay, so you have to be mindful, I suppose, of the audience you're writing for. If you're just if it's just a comedy novel, then it doesn't matter. Okay, as long as it's funny, right? If it's a space opera and the laws of physics have kind of been suspended because it's a space opera, then that's okay, all right? As long as there's an agreement, or there's some explanation, or there's some nod to how things work. Star Trek does it very well. How do the inertia dampeners work? Very well indeed. That's fine. That's perfect. Okay. So work out how that stuff is kind of going to go in advance. So if you're doing anything where set in the present day, make sure the present day level of technology is appropriate. If you're setting something in the past, if you're doing a historical fictional novel set in original Elizabethan times or the Roman Empire, or I don't know, the reign of Henry VIII or something, you're going to go and have to do some research to make sure you get the details right. I.e., what technology did they have? What could they do? What was the social structure? Would they say certain things? What was the rankings? All those sort of things. Is it feasible that someone can do some stuff? One of my classic ones that a lot of people have complained about in the past. Sir Francis Drake and his laser gun. Yes, exactly right. That's not quite right. Or if your book involves time travel, for example, and you go back to a previous era, anybody who knows about that era is going to be paying attention as they're reading your book, because that might be the reason they bought it. So those sort of attention to detail is an important level of stuff. A classic one that an awful lot of fantasy novels get wrong, and I've tried very hard to get this one right, and I still haven't got it right. There's two aspects to fantasy novels that are very often wrong. Horses are a big one. Okay, horses are a really, really big one. An awful lot of fantasy writers treat horses like cars. You basically get on your horse and you gallop to wherever you need to be, and then you get off. You give your horse some food, and maybe a bit of water perhaps, and then you're back on the horse. Okay, you go to wherever the next place is, right? And you can keep basically just refueling your horse every time it stops, and it's fine. Now that isn't the case. That's not what horses can do. Okay, so if you make your gallant horse do that and ride 60 miles a day, uh, it'll very very soon be a dead horse. Okay, horses can't do that. They just can't. Okay, especially if they're carrying stuff. And they certainly can't fight a battle at the end of it and charge around like a lot. So there are physical limitations to what animals can do, which are quite often just forgotten in the fun of writing a quest or a battle scene. Okay, another one is how battles actually work. So and again, you may want to suspend this for the purposes of storytelling. That's the balance you've got to kind of find. So, for example, the Lord of the Rings style battles, where we have arrows with burning pitch being chucked through the air and all that sort of stuff, and scaling the walls and all those kind of things. Now, those sort of things, some of those things did happen, but not quite in the way that they're portrayed in the movies as commonplace things. For example, in medieval warfare, your absolute last resort was to storm the castle. It would be far, far, far better to starve the people out, because that would be an awful lot cheaper and less, a lot less of your people would be killed as a result. So storming the castle was an absolute last resort. The same with the flaming arrows and the massive volleys of arrows that you see in all the movies. Is that actually arrows cost money, right? So you don't want to waste them. So ideally, you want them to hit people. You're not going to fire them blind into things without a very, very good chance of actually hitting something. Okay, so these beautiful volleys of flaming arrows is very much a kind of like, that's very romantic and quite fun, but it's not very realistic. Okay, and sometimes you've got to strike a balance between that looks cool in my mind and in my story versus it's not actually all that realistic. Okay. So, and there's lots of things. If you're writing and this is where, as a writer, you've got to draw a line between entertainment and realism. It's a sliding scale. I mean, one of my favourite movies of recent times is a really stupid movie called Battleship. Okay, and some of you will know this one, and it's just a popcorn movie. Okay. It's nonsensical, basically. And for those of you who haven't seen it, very minor spoilers. It's been out for ages. Aliens come down and decide to have a Barney with the US. I don't know what the US Navy, I suppose it is. And the US Navy goes in and tries to attack these aliens, and of course the aliens have super advanced technology and they beat the US Navy, except for, of course, the heroes who somehow managed to recondition a World War II battleship that just happens to be lying around, and they of course they get it up and running in like about a day, which is impossible, and they carry shells from one end of the battleship to the other, which is impossible, and they basically get all these old guys who used to work on this battleship, who know how to kind of fire it up, and they take it into battle, and of course they win. Hurrah! Yay, go America! But it's just fun. All right, so I'm happy to suspend disbelief for the sense of enjoyment, and the book can be the same. Okay, your book can be. And Space Cowboys. I mean, Space Cowboys is complete nonsense in terms of space travel and stuff. Okay, but it's quite amusing. Okay, so bear that in mind. You have to do enough research to make your book work, but depending on what you're writing, if you want to be taken a bit more seriously, you're going to have to step up your game in terms of the research. And Galaxy Quest, Galaxy Quest is is the best Star Trek movie that was never made, right? All that sort of stuff. So you need to bear that in mind in terms of your research. What do you need to know in order to tell your story, and how realistic do you want it to be? Now, I personally try to write books that are to be taken seriously. They're not comedy. Okay, they may have some comedic elements in them. Places where you'll go, oh, that was a funny comment by that guy, but it's not funny overall. The comedy's in there to diffuse the situation, which is actually quite serious. Okay, so the characters are facing some real crises, and you can't just employ sleight of tricks and gung ho to get out of it, because they'll die. Okay, it'll be a messy end and they will lose. So you're trying to create some stakes and you're trying to create a realistic situation. Pretty much all of my stories, they're designed to have plausible, real situations backed up by some science and backed up by some realism, with something sort of detractive for the sake of storytelling, which is always the case, because that's a bit of a coincidence, that stuff always happens. But it depends on what you're writing. It does depend on what you're writing. Now, there's a cliche in here that needs to be said at this point in the stream, because this is very important. You probably heard the writing adage, which is write what you know. Okay, and I don't like this one at all. I think it's very, very poor advice. Okay, so it gets bandied about a lot by professional writers to younger, inexperienced or less experienced writers. Write what you know, don't write what you don't know, is the corollary. The problem is when you're young, you haven't got as much life experience, right? So does that mean a young person can't write about being old, or can't write about being married if they haven't been married, or can't write about a relationship if they haven't had a relationship, or because we can use our imagination, right? That's what we do. It's all made up. I hate to tell you this. Now, I think this particularly applies in the realm of science fiction and fantasy, because hands up in the audience, how many of you have actually fired a laser pistol, right? It won't be that many. And how many of you have actually flown on a real warp-powered starship? No, nobody can say no to that either. Okay? And how many of you have been resuscitated from death and had yourself cloned? Okay? And how many of you have taken a hyperspace jump and all those kind of things? Elric has fired a 2-watt laser. Yeah, okay, so I've done that. Yeah, it's classified as this. Yeah, so you know what I mean. If you're in the realm of fantasy or science fiction, nobody's done any of these things, so nobody knows what they're like. So how can we write what we know? Because nobody knows. All you can do is use your imagination. And I think if you're doing any kind of speculative fiction like that, that's absolutely fine. I've also come across, and you see this a lot, and there are some horrendous examples of this. Okay, it's usually one way rather than the other. There's actually a Reddit page which is good. It's good. It's good for a laugh. It has to be said. Called Men Writing Women. Okay, and it's full of shockingly bad examples of men either just writing about women or putting dialogue in the mouths of their female characters, and I don't really need to cite any examples of it to tell you how shockingly bad it is, but they are shockingly bad, the examples that come up on there. However, I have seen some equally egregious examples of women writing men. Okay, so I don't think it's entirely gender specific, this one. I think you can just get it entirely wrong if you aren't sensitive to the nuances of how people actually act. I think you've got to observe people a little bit and pick those kind of things up. Now I've and that's as you're putting your novel together, structuring things and checking things out is an important part of it, and getting your novel read by test readers or beta readers, whatever you want to call them, of multiple genders and persuasions and outlooks and things is valuable, because you've got different insight. I was quite nervous initially of writing female characters, because my perception on this is write what you know, right? I said, well, I'm not a woman, so I can't. How can I be a woman? Because I'm not. It's as simple as that. So will my female characters just be wrong? Will they be, will they just not work? Because I'm a bloke trying to write from a female's perspective, and so I have a bunch of ladies, as it were, who will read my draft and basically tell me no woman would say that sort of thing. Does my wife help? Yes, she does. Yeah, so she'll go through and say, does that make sense for a woman to do it? And there have been corrections. Okay, there have been corrections. So my wife and some of my other friends who are ladies have basically said, no, that's she probably wouldn't say that. She'd probably just glare at that point if somebody said that to her, rather than just rejoice. She'd just say it with her eyes, So so that sort of stuff is is useful feedback, and you get more experience of these sort of things. But I wouldn't stop people saying you can't do these things. Okay, One of the things I do notice on Twitter, which is a bit sad, is I see a lot of people basically saying, unless you are this, you can't do that. And I don't agree with that at all. I think you can imagine. You won't get it right. How many of us do? But you can imagine being another person. That's the whole point of being a writer, is putting yourself in different places and in different people and trying to experience thoughts and things different, from different perspectives. And the more you do it, the more experienced you get. But those sort of things, don't put up an artificial barrier. Men can write perfectly good female characters, and women can write perfectly good male characters, and everybody else on the gender spectrum can write perfectly good characters across the entire gender spectrum. That's a talent, and that's work and practice at writing. It's not there's no hard and fast rules about what you can and can't do. Okay, but do put in a bit of homework to make sure that you're kind of getting it right. And so don't limit yourself, don't artificially limit yourself, but make sure you are looking at things and observing things and checking things out to make sure it feels like it's correct. So that's a piece of advice as well. So this whole write what you know, I think, is an appalling piece of advice for writers, because you can't know everything and you can't always get it right, and there's some things that you can never personally experience. It's impossible. So I would change that piece of advice to write what you can learn about, okay, and what you're interested in learning about. So if you want to learn and observe, and don't do this in a creepy way, but if you want to learn and observe how different types of people would react in different types of situations, you can do that, and you can ask them. Part of researching your novel, I mean, like I say, if somebody already mentioned, my wife, I would say, okay, well, how should this character react in this situation? Okay, so this has just happened to her. This has just happened to her. I think she would do this. What do you think she would do? And sometimes my wife will go, yeah, that's exactly what she would do. And sometimes she'll go, well, maybe she would do this. And I go, oh yeah, well, that's quite, yeah, she would, wouldn't she? And you sort of thought of it from a different perspective. And so do your research. Just ask, talk to people. How would they react? That depends on what you're interested in writing. There's an example of the sort of thing that you might do, particularly for dialogue and stuff. And I've always said on the stream in the past, the test of your dialogue, read it out loud. Okay, read it out loud to yourself in the mirror. If it sounds corny, it will sound corny, and it's not right. Okay, so go change it. If it sounds okay, then it sounds okay. But read it out loud to yourself, and you'll quickly figure out whether or not the dialogue that you've written in your story actually works as dialogue. Have a play act it to yourself. Well, that's an interesting thing, Chris. My grandpa Jack has been dead for close to 8 years now, but I did start the hardboiled detective thing. And if he'd been alive, I could have queried him on life in 1940s New York. So, older relatives and older people that can be a fantastic story fodder, for things that happened and how things were back in the day, all that sort of stuff. So those sort of things. Now, for science fiction and fantasy, what does it feel like to cast a spell? You're going to have to make it up. Does it feel like your hands on fire? Does it feel like water's gushing out of your fingertips? Does it feel like lightning is crackling out of your I don't know. Neither do you. Okay, but pick something and go with that. Okay, that's how it how it feels to cast a magic spell. How does it feel to make a hyperspace jump? Nobody knows, right? Maybe you won't feel anything at all because it's just something that happens to the ship, or maybe there's that sort of ghastly roller coaster effect as you go into hyperspace, or maybe everything spins around and you feel sick. Make it up, okay? Just describe something that fits, and then keep it consistent throughout your novels, okay? Because you don't want you basically want to get that across. Maybe hyperspace travel is easy. Maybe hyperspace travel is something everybody really, really hates and can't wait to get over, and it's an awful thing that you have to experience just to get somewhere. Make it part of the story, okay? So how do you decide? How do you decide what to research and what not? It depends entirely on your novel, okay? Now, I've got a novel here. Let me switch over to my screen. Zip. There we go. Now I'm going to just show you a few examples of the sort of stuff that I do. So this dare I say, is my amazing writing folder. It's very imaginative. It's called D Drive Books. Don't know what D stands for, but there we go. And the first book I ever wrote was a book called Torn. Now this actually is arguably a romance novel, which is not how I would describe it, but that's the closest thing it has to a genre. Yeah, so I mean, some people come, some good examples in there. So, you could, Chris says, for example, it feels like a lot of resistance. You need to push through to cast a spell. You see this a lot actually with things like Harry Potter and stuff, where when they're holding their wands. Me and my son always laugh about this when we see it. When they're holding their wands, they're kind of having to strain, aren't they, as if they're pushing against some really, really bad force. And the hand is just wrestling with I need a wand, but I haven't got a wand. I'm going to use a pencil to demonstrate. So this is my magic wand, okay, and you have to kind of like that, It's as if they're struggling against some sort of strange force, and they're actually the same with the Force, from Star Wars. When they kind of face off against each other, they're kind of like sort of straining physically against something that you can't see. Okay, and that's a way of demonstrating to the viewer that whatever they're doing is quite hard work. Okay, they're physically struggling, and that's how it manifests itself, and that's maybe how magic works. Okay, or maybe not. Maybe magic doesn't have a physical element; it's all mental. You can do that easier in a book than you can in a film. So it depends on how you want to portray things. Okay, but those are sort of techniques that can be used, but just make sure you use them consistently, right? And when I say do your research there, decide how it's going to work and stick to it, right? That's important. Now, this particular one, look, I'm really organised here. I've even got a folder called Research. How good is that? So to give you the short version of this story, well, at least it was. It's not now because it was written 15 years ago. It was contemporary. Okay, it was a contemporary novel set in the here and now. So no spaceships, but alas, no science fiction, no wizards and witches and warlocks and magic and stuff. This is the real world. Kind of then-ish. It was, I suppose, 2005, 2000, that sort of era. And basically, it's kind of a boy meets girl story, except the boy is a scientist, the girl is a fundamentalist Christian. The two meet, they don't get on, they exchange worldviews, have a lot of arguments, end up being romantically involved in each other, and then things go wrong with families and politics and all sorts of stuff. Anyway, in order to write that novel correctly, I needed to do quite a lot of research. Okay, because I am not a scientist, and I'm not a fundamentalist Christian either. So I had to go and do some research. Okay, so this folder is all of the stuff that I saved onto my hard drive in order to make sure I was writing the novel correctly. Okay, so for example, if there are any Christians on the stream, I don't know if this is an accurate thing, or I hope it is, because this is what I use. But how do you become a Christian? Well, here is a document that I downloaded. Sorry, it's gone a bit big. Which basically informed my stuff. Well, how do you become a Christian, right? Okay, you have to do a whole bunch of things. Okay, it's based on biblical texts, as I understand, and it's a gift of salvation. It's a gift of faith. It's not something you actually do yourself. It's something you receive. And there are some specific steps that you have to take. Okay, you have to admit that you're a sinner, you're wrong. You have to believe that Jesus died for your sins on the cross. You have to take that of faith. And there's some prayers you have to make and so on and so forth. I wanted to get those details right, okay? So I didn't know how you did it. I basically found out about it, okay? Yeah, that's doing the research. The other thing I did for that particular one is I did go along to some churches, okay? And it absolutely does vary with things. I had a particular denomination in mind. I had a very fundamentalist, evangelical kind of idea in mind. So I did actually go along to a church to do the research, okay? sort of sat at the back and watched the service take place. And they did actually have a bunch of new, I don't know what they call them, but a bunch of new people who were preparing to become Christians, who went through this process and became Christians by the end of the service. Okay, and I just observed, okay, sitting at the back, and then they gave me a very nice cup of tea at the end, asked me how I thought how I found it, and I said it was very interesting, thanks very much. Never went back again. So I hope that's not abusing my position as a writer. But yeah, it was fascinating. A bit weird from my perspective, but it was absolutely fascinating to see how it worked, and I was able to use that. There's a whole scene in the book which is very much based on my experience of going to this church, because some weird stuff happened. Okay, at least to me, from my perspective, is that there were people. I mean, it was fascinating, because my only experience of church really had been up to then sort of Anglican churches as we have in the UK, which are very old-fashioned. Okay, you go along to a really freezing cold building, which dates from, I don't know, 1400 or something, and you sit there with a book, and a guy at the front just says some stuff. There's some really, really ancient hymns, which date from the 1800s or the 1700s, right? There's a little kind of, it's called the sermon. It's a little homily based on, everyone be nice to each other, effectively. And then you basically have a cup of tea and you'll go home. That's basically the Anglican church there is. So this evangelical one was entirely different. I mean, if they weren't both called Christian services, you wouldn't put them in the same category at all, because they just had nothing in common. The service that I went to was, there was a band. With real musical instruments, not just an organ. There was a projector screen with the words on it. It was all very high tech and very modern. There were lights and then sound systems and all sorts of things going on, really, really lively music. And then people would, in the middle of the service, get up and start chanting words, and I was like, what are they doing? What's this? It sounded almost like Latin, but I know a bit of Latin, and it wasn't Latin. I couldn't figure out what it was. I did ask somebody. It's a thing called speaking in tongues, where these people believe that there's a heavenly language being sort of sent forth, and this is all part of what they do, and. I found it fascinating. It was very strange, but it was fascinating. So anyway, I was just in observe mode, and I made notes of all this sort of stuff, and used it to get the ambience of that sort of environment into the book, and understand a bit more from the perspective of people who were going through that process what they felt they were doing, so I could write it accurately. So so there we go. I did that. I went along and did the research. So my character, the girl in this particular story, is a fundamentalist Christian who is completely into that sort of stuff, and that's how she behaves in the story. So that's the thing. The other thing is that one of the characters in the book, excuse me, suffers a head injury, and has a car accident as a result of that head injury, right? So I wanted to make sure that was handled correctly as well. So what I wanted to happen was for her to pass out in her car and have a car crash from which she survived. Okay, for purposes of kind of finishing the book up. But I thought, she can't just pass out in the car. Why would she pass out in the car? I mean, the old thing that I've asked you guys to do in the past, which is ask that why question a number of times. Why would she pass out in the car? Well, there's something wrong with her head. Okay, so what's wrong with her head? Why would that be a problem? Okay, maybe there's a there's a blood pressure problem. Is there a real medical condition that can do that sort of thing? Okay, so I started looking into head injuries, okay, and all these kind of things. And I came across something called, where is it? Is it this one? Head injuries, maybe. It's one of these ones here. Let's just have a look. I started downloading all sorts of stuff. This is the thing, but the writers, okay, don't look at writers' search history in Google, okay, because it'll be full of all sorts of very, very disturbing things. How long can somebody survive in a vacuum? What actually happens when you chop somebody's head off? How much pain can the human body deal with? all these sorts of things are things that you may find in the writers. It's perfectly normal, okay, for writers to be doing that sort of thing. So don't be alarmed with the writer's search history. But I think it was this one that I came across about. A traumatic aortic disruption is caused by the shearing forces of high-speed front and side impact automobile accidents and so forth. So I started digging into, okay, so what actually happens to the human body in a car crash? What could it's perfectly normal for writers and mass murderers. Okay, no difference at all in search history. So those sort of things. So I started looking at what are the medical conditions, and I found a medical condition that would, if you like, do what I needed it to do for the purposes of the story. I didn't use that. Then I wanted to, the character gets airlifted to hospital. How does the airlift process work? So, I contacted the my local air ambulance and actually got an interview with them. Took some notes about that. How does the ambulance actually work? So, there's an air ambulance. And I made a whole bunch of notes from there. They were very gracious, actually. They did give me a little note in the book, and they basically gave me the breakdown. This is what we do, so they gave me this is from the interview notes I took. How does it work? Okay, well, we have this desk, and they bring in this, and these are the things that they say, and this is how it gets transferred, and blah 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 blah. Okay. The helicopter we use has the following registration number, so and that would be mentioned on the the airways, etc., etc. So all that kind of stuff. So some of that stuff is superfluous. You're never going to use that detail, but little things. Okay, so for example, this is a classic one that they were talking about at the time. Is you don't say an accident, you say an RTA. Okay, which is a road traffic accident. That's what so it's an RTA in collision with an HGV, heavy goods vehicle. That's how they say these things. So it just makes it that bit more authentic. Okay, so I did a bit of research on that sort of thing. And then what happens when the person gets to hospital? What do they do? What do they say? So again, what's the ambulance procedure? Okay, so I managed to find some various bits and pieces, and this is just discusses how the ambulance procedure works. If they get they get the blue lights and the ambulance turns up, what do they actually do? Because I wanted to write it with a sense of kind of urgency. So I did all that kind of research to pick it up. Now some of that is too much. Okay, didn't use an awful lot of this data that I'd gathered, but it did help to just refer a couple of things. And then a friend of mine who was one of my beta readers turned out to be an actual medic, and he tweaked a few bits and pieces for me as well. He said, but they don't do that anymore. They used to do that maybe 5 years ago, but we don't do that anymore because things have got better. Okay, so little bits and pieces, and it also depends on where you are in the world. Okay, so this is very UK specific because that's where I set my novel. If you're writing in the US, there'll be different words and different things for various different bits and pieces, and it's important, depending on who you're writing for, to get some of that stuff right. Okay. Here's a blood pressure thing, and I was like, okay, so this is basically. I was able to get hold of a transcript. I contacted my local hospital. I don't think that you'll be able to do this now because they're so busy, but a few years ago they weren't quite so bad. And they actually had a scenario whereby, and you probably wouldn't do this for data protection reasons now again, but 15 years ago things were a bit different. So this is actually a genuine description of an actual accident that happened. A 46-year-old woman is brought to the emergency department by EMS after being involved. And you're like, EMS? What does EMS mean? Okay, emergency medical services. Okay, she was a passenger in the backseat of a car. Accident involved frontal impact with the car moving 50 miles an hour. Patient was not wearing a seatbelt. Driver says she's not been awake since the accident. On admission, the patient's vital signs are as follows: blood pressure 100/60 mmHg. I don't know. Heart rate 78 beats per minute. Respiratory rate 8 breaths per minute. GCS score is 7, and a CT scan shows frontal epidural hematoma with mass effect. So, okay, I don't know what that means, but it sounds good. So what I did is I used that to go and investigate what does this stuff actually mean, and then translate it into stuff that I can actually use in my novel. I was able to use things like this to set the dialogue for those scenes. Really abrupt. GCS score is 6. GCS score is now 7. GCS score is now dropped to 5. What does it actually mean? Well, it doesn't matter kind of what it means as long as it's authentic to the way the scene works. Okay. So that's the sort of research that's kind of going on there. I know what Mass Effect is. I think it's a different sort of Mass Effect, but there we go. One of the things that's beautiful that I was able to use back then is because with Google Maps now you can go anywhere in the world and just take a look. Okay, so I set my the start of my story at a place called the Wolf Run Trading Estate. Okay, it's somewhere in Wolverhampton. I've never been there. I probably never will be there. But here we go. There's a picture of it, and I just I wanted to set the novel in real places. Okay, so I went, okay, that feels about where I need to be. Is there anything there? And I found this place, and then use that in the novel. Okay, I've never been to Wolverhampton. There's East Park, Wolverhampton. I don't know where that is either. Quite why I chose that, but those are things I find it personally as a writer quite useful to have visual images. So, for example, I would have used this. The leaves blowing alongside the corrugated iron fence. Something like that. Okay, to describe the scene. She looked up as a car pulled out of the side junction. That's enough. Okay, that's what this sort of stuff gives you. But it helps set it into a real place. Minton Close. I don't know where that is. Maybe that's one of the houses somebody lived in. Okay, for example, I find that stuff quite useful. You may or may not, but it's quite useful. It's useful sometimes to have. References for those kind of bits and pieces. So that's a contemporary novel. Now, for those of you who know, the sci-fi work that I did, the Elite Dangerous stuff is a bit different. So for those of you who don't know, Elite Reclamation, which is the book here, is a sort of space opera novel based on a computer video game. And this was writing here was a little bit different. So I've got a research folder here which is full of all sorts of stuff. Let me just get that. So I don't know why it's gone to that funny mode. There we go. Let's go for details. So this is a case of writing a book in somebody else's environment. Okay, so the universe here has been constructed by somebody else. The laws of the universe have been set up by somebody else. The spaceships, the way they work, and that sort of thing has been decided. It's been done. It's been worked out by somebody else, which is good and it's bad depending on how you want to work. Because sometimes it's like, oh, thank goodness for that. Everybody knows what an XYZ spaceship is, and I don't need to explain that in the novel because everybody kind of already gets it. On the flip side, you can't just invent something new because it may not be allowed by the university you're writing in. So you've got less freedom in some ways. But it's a sort of thing. Where's my book now? Here's a bit of history. This particular game, for those of you who obviously do know this, there'll be a lot of you who do, is based on this game, which came out in 1984, and so it's very, very old. Okay, but even this comes with a bunch of useful background information. Okay, so this is a universe of space piracy and stuff like that. And so there's spaceships and things that fly through the universe and do stuff. Okay, they attack each other and there's pirates and they shoot things and there's missiles and all sorts of things like that. Okay, so this is your basic document for research. That's how you start off, and then. As the new game developed and more stuff came on. So what does the inside of a ship look like? Well, here was some concept art that I was given back in the day. So racks and racks of cargo containers, and that's what the inside of a spaceship looks like. Okay, and we could probably crouch down and hide between the cargo racks. So maybe there's a scene or something there. Okay, here's a trading screen. This is all. Pre the game coming out. So any of you, this is for Elite Dangerous historians. This is this is pre the game. This is all kind of concept art stuff. So the idea that you could have a look in your cargo hold and see what was on board the ship. None of this actually happened, unfortunately. Alas, it was quite cool. But the idea that you could be sneaking around inside the cargo bay, maybe as a a pirate or a ne'er-do-well or a stowaway or something was potentially a compelling sort of thing that you could do. And then what do the ships look like? Well, here was a ship. Okay, so that's where the cockpit is, the engines at the back. These things are sort of heat shields, and the thrusters go around the edge, and it's got lights on the front. You can see a guy there for scale, so you can get a feel for how big the ship was, and so on and so forth. So lots of detail was provided, which was quite nice. The other thing was that there was a lot of stories set in this universe. So the original game came with a story called The Dark Wheel, which was very exciting when you were sort of 13, 14. And that's where a lot of the mythos of the game kind of started out from. So that's something you had to read and research. Okay. Also, there were quite a lot of articles written about the game that allowed you to find out a bit more about it. So this is a particularly good one about Elite called The Digital Antiquarian, which I still think is online somewhere. You can probably go find it. But it was a very, very good breakdown of what the game was and how it works and all those sort of things, which was quite useful. And about the trading and the piracy and the way the game was written and all that kind of good stuff. So there's lots of bits and pieces there. There were also subsequent games, and those subsequent games also came with stories. So there was quite a lot of rich information that you had to you pick up. So for example, Living in Hope here by somebody called Kathy Dickinson was a previously written story in this environment. So had to look through there for the sort of clues and things that you could pick up on, and then use those kind of things, and make sure ideally you didn't contradict anything that had already been written, which was an important part of it as well. Now that's not a perfect, you can't make that perfect, but you can do your best to assimilate all the information that's gone before and try and align with it, if you like. So The Dark Wheel is probably the most famous story, but there were quite a lot of others. And then there was the manuals and all sorts of things. So there's loads and loads of detail. This is stuff that you had to be familiar with in order to write a compelling tale in this universe. Otherwise, you'd find the fans would basically go, it's that detail there is not right. That star system isn't correctly described. The detail of this is incorrect. You've got to be on top of your game. You've got to know your stuff. So. All that kind of bits and pieces. And there was a timeline of events. This is an early version of the timeline of events that things happen. So once that was clarified, you had to stick with it. That's when that occurred. So you couldn't contradict that in anything that you described. So there was a lot of work done earlier. I mean, they've moved away from it in recent years and kind of let it atrophy a bit. But when Elite Dangerous was first put together, there was a massive, massive, massive focus on getting the timeline right, getting the stories right, working out what was allowed, what wasn't allowed, what could happen, what couldn't happen, all those kind of things. And we worked within those constraints, and I was one of many writers who worked with those constraints and contributed to some of that sort of stuff to make it all kind of work and be together. And again, a lot of research was done. You can see there's an awful lot of stuff in here that works on lots of things. And we didn't. The funny thing about this is we were writing these books for this computer game that hadn't actually come out yet. Right at the end we had, and I can show you a little bit of it. This wonderful video where some space battles were sort of shown, which looks like this. Let me just whack it on over here. It doesn't look anything like this actually in reality. But this is the sort of stuff that we eventually did have to work with. So you could play around with it, and it's good space opera stuff, right? But it gave me as a writer the ability to go, okay, so that's kind of what it feels like to be in this universe. There's spaceships, there's things flying around, there's laser beams, and da 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 da. Okay, it's not very realistic, but it's a space opera, and this is kind of how it all works. So. that's what we use to kind of inspire the writing juices, if you like, to make sure you can understand how it works. Big guns shooting off and things exploding, etc., etc., etc. Two big monstrous battle cruisers fighting off against each other, and then so on and so forth. So it gave you a vibe of what the game was all about. And that's very important to kind of get the atmosphere of what you're trying to write. So all those sort of things were, if you like, canon and fodder for doing all the writing. And then things like the cockpit HUD. So this is what we were told the game would look like when it first came out. And you can see a lot of things here kind of still are in the game, but they're quite a lot changed. But the fundamentals are still there. So you've got this sort of scanner in the middle, something that tells you how strong your shields are, a sort of compass, sci-fi reticles for all the important information, something about how your guns are working and how strong your shields are, blah 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 blah, all the kind of usual sort of sci-fi kind of things. But it was useful for us to be able to write, because if you're putting your characters in the cockpit of a space-going vessel which has guns, you need to kind of know what the inside of that's going to look like. So that's basically kind of how it looks. So that's the sort of thing that you have now. That research is a bit different because a lot of that detail is being provided for you. You don't have to go and get it, but you have to adhere to it and be aware of it. So if you're thinking of writing a book for another universe or in another universe, you need to absorb all the material for that for that environment by going and doing your research again, making sure you know about all the stuff. Spoilers for the stream. Boris survived the no confidence. I thought he probably would. He's a slippery rascal, isn't he, old Boris? But there we go. Spoilers, apologies. A bit late now. So there's another piece of research. Okay, now another type of research. Okay, so if you're doing a speculative novel, right, of something that doesn't exist. Okay, let's go to my Shadewood one as a thing. So here is a book that a series of books based in an environment that doesn't actually exist. Okay, it's entirely made up. Nobody's been here before. Nobody's done any work on this. Nobody has nobody's been there. This is entirely brand new. I'm inventing this kind of from scratch. How do you start going about that sort of? You have to have an idea on a premise, okay, and you may need to do some kind of background work on it, kind of in advance. Now I've taken you through the Shadewood background and detail document before, but I spent a lot of time, particularly early on with Shadewood 1, on the research. So this is all kind of getting me started. So it gives you an idea of the sort of stuff I looked at to decide how I wanted things to work. So here's a book, and I actually met this guy. The first thing was, okay, I thought, let's have a red dwarf star. Why not? Okay, let's have a planet in orbit around a red dwarf star. Okay, that gives me some problems. I did a bit of research online. I came across a book by this chap called David S. Stevenson, and this book here, and I've got this is my PDF copy. I've actually got a proper copy as well, but this is just easier for research. Is actually a non-fiction book. We were discussing non-fiction earlier in the stream. Okay, actually a non-fiction book by David S. Stevenson on the exact topic: can you live basically on a red dwarf, on a planet that goes around a red dwarf star? It's a published, serious, proper book. Okay, this guy's done the work. And if you scroll to the end of this book, you can see he's got a proper index of all sorts of important stuff. He's also got a glossary, and I think in here somewhere he'll have his conclusions of various bits and pieces. So there's lots of sections in here. I mean, this is a massive book. Okay, this is a serious book. The actual physical copy is about that big, and I read this entire thing as research for my novel. and to see whether or not actually what I was thinking of doing was actually even at all viable. So, in this case, Mr. Stevenson goes through, how we discovered extraterrestrial exoplanets in the first place, how they form, what happens, what gravity, what planets of red dwarfs are actually probably going to be like, how hot can they get, what are the atmospheric conditions, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in here, I found all sorts of interesting things that I could use as story hooks. Okay. And go in there. So having read through this a few times, and then having a few questions, I actually wrote to Mr. Stevenson, who was gracious enough to reply and answer an awful lot of my questions. And so when I finished Shadewood, I sent him a complimentary copy of the first book, saying, this was partly inspired by your work, Mr. Stevenson. I hope you enjoy it. We've we've sort of got into a little bit of a thing now. So whenever he basically put a note in his next book, which was the atmospheric and weather conditions on red dwarf, on planets that go about red dwarf stars, and he gave Shadewood a mention, which was which was very cool. Basically said, as Drew Wager has postulated, I thought postulated, that's a perfectly good word, has postulated in his fictional Shadewood saga, it's possible potentially to have a human civilization on such a planet. It's like, it's actually in a proper book, not the made up nonsense like I have. I've actually got the mention in a proper book. And so what happens now is every time he brings out a new book, he tries to give a mention, if he can, to something that I've written, because he knows he'll get a free copy of my book. So we've been exchanging copies of each other's books for a few years now, which has been quite cool. So he does all the hard work, and I just make up stories about it, which is quite good. But what I wanted to do with Shadewood is I wanted to have the story based in proper science. Okay, I didn't want to just, it's a world. Okay, the world had to be realistic. So what I basically did is I used what Mr. Stevenson had written in his book, which was cutting edge proper scientific research at the time, and I used it to inform my novel. That's my approach. That's the level of detail I went into with Shadewood, to make sure that it kind of worked. And there were lots of interesting things that I could use as story elements. So, for example, red dwarf stars, unsurprisingly, are kind of reddy orange in colour. They hardly emit any green or blue light at all. So on the surface of the planet, what does it look like? Well, it looks orangey red all the time. In order for plants to photosynthesize, they would have to be different colour to any Earth-based plants. Okay, so on Earth we see plants as green, right? Green leaves, green grass, etc. The only reason we're seeing that as humans is that the plants are effectively reflecting green light to us. They're absorbing blue light because they find it really useful, and they're absorbing red light because they find that useful as well, but not quite so much. The reason we see green grass and green leaves is because that light the plants can't absorb. Okay, so that light is bouncing back off away from the plants into our retinas, and we see, oh, that's a lovely green plant. That's how that works. Okay, now on a red dwarf, around a planet around a red dwarf, that wouldn't work because the plants wouldn't be getting any blue light. Red dwarf stars don't really give off any green light; they only give off red light. So if the plants are absorbing all of that light, they would appear black. And that's a detail I was able to put into the book based on the research that had already been done. And there's all complicated spectra and all sorts of things like that, which I don't know how they work. But the essence is that plants on these sort of planets wouldn't appear green; they would appear black, to our eyes anyway. And there were lots of other little bits and pieces like that I could pull out of the out of the story that goes. And the nice thing about it was that when Mr. Stevenson actually read the Shadewood, and he really enjoyed it. He said he really enjoyed it. He read it. He basically said it's lovely. He said, yes, because I can see what you've done. I said, you've taken quite a few liberties, Mr. Wager, with some of the physics. I went, yeah, I know, but I'm a writer, He said, he says the essence of what you've written is correct. He says, and I can see how you've woven in the facts into the fiction. And he says it's really, really good. He says it's one of the most scientifically realistic fictional stories that I read based on what we can't you know, which I think was about as close as I was going to get to. Yeah, it's really good. So yeah, it was nice. Yeah, and I felt I'd done it justice. And then, you know, I was also looking at other things. A lot of this stuff I didn't use, and a lot of the stuff you do research you won't use. Okay, for example, I was looking here at a few bits and pieces that, you know, this is actually for the priestesses. So for those of you who know the Shayward Talk, you'll know there's a group of women who are called the priestesses, who basically think they're in charge of everything, and they're kind of anointed. You know, a kind of matriarchy, I suppose, a very aggressive matriarchy in the story. And I was kind of trying to figure out early on how I wanted them to act. And I started by thinking, well, maybe they act like almost like a hive mind, and they're kind of like insects. So I started looking at ants, you know, how do ants work, and how do termites work? You know, for example, how do they organise themselves, and, you know, to do great things. I eventually discarded that idea as a way of making them organise themselves. I did borrow a few things from the old caste system in India, so that, you know, the social structure and the various bits and pieces that wrapped around that. And I pinched a few ideas from Australian Aboriginal culture as well, so I did a bit of research into those kind of areas to see. I wanted something that wasn't familiar, if you like, to most Western cultures. I didn't want sort of the classic, you know, parent-child, you know, grandchildren sort of relationship. I wanted something a bit different. I wanted to mix and match some various different bits and pieces as to how those sort of things work. So I pinched ideas from less familiar cultures on the earth to inform how I structured how the priestess's organisation actually works. So it shouldn't be very analogous to anything, but it's got ideas pinched from, you know, various different places. So that's another way you can use existing stuff that actually is out there to kind of, what can I pinch from there, what can I pinch from there? And you can do the same with religion, you can do the same with social structure, you can see the same with politics and all sorts of things. Pinched ideas from historic cultures or historic politics and use those and pick those kind of things in. So there's lots of bits and pieces you can do like that. Red dwarfs as well. So I mean, I spent a lot of time looking through this sort of thing and then summarising it. And, you know, here's an example of how the weather would work on a red dwarf, and it's kind of because the heat's concentrated on one side and it's freezing cold on the other, and then how the wind works, and, you know, does it, you know, all that sort of stuff. So I was, you know, there's all sorts of graphs and things like that. Yeah, I can't remember what some of this stuff was, but, you know, there's you know, radiation. Some of the stuff I understood and some of it I didn't. But, you know, you pick up various bits and pieces and it helps inform the story. So there are small bits and pieces of the story whereby Kiri, let's say, is one of the characters, will observe something, and to her it'll be perfectly normal. It's, you know, she just glances up and sees a pattern in the sky or something, or notices that the wind has changed direction. But it will be informed by some background research that I've done in order to make it that little bit more compelling as a story. Now, I've had a few people. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, well, do you really need to do that? And the answer to that is no, you don't. Okay. Again, it depends on, you know, how much attention to detail you want to give the story. How much you like doing research, and, you know, what you feel is necessary to tell the story that you're telling. What I would say is I've had quite a few people, both in reviews and kind of in person at conventions, saying, I can really tell that you've delved into some of the stuff behind this, at some detail. I can sense the research behind the story, and it makes me feel, you know, more at home in that world. It feels like a real place because it makes sense. It has laws. It feels like it's got some sort of integrity to it, and that sort of thing, I think, for the verisimilitude, the escapism involved in the novel, does help you, the reader, get into the place. If the world feels like a genuine place that could exist because, you know, somebody's worked out all the, you know, the various bits and pieces. How do the oceans work? How does the temperature work? How does the weather work? All that kind of stuff. It can help place the reader in the place that you're trying to imagine. You know, with the elite stuff, you know, getting the details right to me was incredibly important early on. You know, the cobra had to be the right size. It couldn't do things that the previous novel said it couldn't do, etc., etc. Don't break the rules. Stick to the rules and make sure that your universe, your lore, your background information is all consistent and all makes sense. So that sort of stuff is very important to me. It may not be so important to you, but you can decide how much research is appropriate for your novel. And that comes down basically kind of full circle as to where I started this sort of conversation. So how much research do you need? Only you can really decide. If you're writing about something and you're kind of making it up, and you're kind of like, I don't really know about this topic, but I'm just going to do my best. You may want to take some time aside and go and look up that topic, and just make sure you're doing justice to it. What's it like to take an exam? What's it like to drive a car? What's it like to fly an aircraft? What's it like to be a passenger in an aircraft? All those kind of things. If you haven't experienced those yourself, go and do some research. If you can go and experience the thing yourself, why not do so? Okay, that's definitely good. I used a scene, which I'll go and get actually, because this is quite a good example. Let me just go and get a novel off my shelf. I think is it this one? Okay, I found it. So in my second Shadewood novel, sorry about this, destroyed the entire fabric of the universe there. In my second Shadewood novel, there's a scene here, okay, right near the end. Where is it? I'm just trying to find it. Right, okay, I'll read it out to you, okay. Drew Beyond Space. It just says here, so I'm going to read actually from one of my novels. Cold, biting cold, a raging torrent of bubbles ripping past, roaring in her ears, green depths beckoning, mesmerising. The current twisting, spinning her around, and she choked on sharp, briny water. She flailed, one hand somehow grasping a rope, a brief respite. The wave receded. She managed a sweet gasp of air before she was submerged and spun around again. The water was chilling her, the muscles in her arm burning, the urge to draw breath overpowering. She tried to pull herself above the torrent. Air, a desperate breath before she was plunged into the cold once more. Panic arose. She couldn't see anything but the green swirl of water. Don't let go. She felt her wrist caught in a strong grip, pulling her upwards against the flow, and slowly she was lifted, hauled out of the sea, water streaming from her. She collapsed on the deck of the ship, gasping for air. Okay, so there's a small reading from Shadewood. Now that particular scene is only about 3 paragraphs there, is basically a girl who's basically run and jumped trying to get onto a boat, okay, and she's missed, and she's fallen into the water behind the boat as it's receding from the dock, and she can't swim, and so somebody throws a rope out to her and eventually she grasps it and they pull her on board. Now that scene is actually inspired by something that happened to me. I did. I was on one of these dolphin swim experiences when I was in Australia, and what they do, it's crazy. I don't know if they still do this, but they did then. What they do is you get into a wetsuit, and they basically string you along. Basically, you lower it into this special boat. You hang onto this rope with all the kit on, okay, and you're lowered into the water whilst hanging onto this rope, and the boat is going at, I don't know, a decent speed, probably, 15, 20 knots or something, because the dolphins don't hang around. They're moving around. So basically the boat tries to pursue the dolphins and you're in the water with your goggles on trying to see the dolphins. Anyway, what happened to me was, of course, got in, hang on the rope, mistimed my thing on the rope, and then shoom, I'm underneath the boat and then I'm behind. Okay. Now I can swim. So I wasn't in actually any particular danger, okay, but what happened was, because of the wake of the boat and the bumping, and it was in the ocean, okay, so it wasn't near land, this was, 15 miles out to sea, so there were some waves, And I went down, and as a not particularly confident swimmer, I was trying to get back to the surface because I thought I need to breathe, right? I know how oxygen works, and I can't breathe underwater. And as I was sucked underneath the boat, of course, I was turned over, and I was like, I don't know which way is up. All I can see is green, and I can see bubbles flashing around me, and I can hear noise whooshing. And for a moment, I panicked. It literally was like, "Oh my God, I'm going to die!" And I was twirled around for maybe 2 or 3 seconds tops, and then suddenly I was able to distinguish where up was. Of course, the water was cold. I was in a bit of shock because I hadn't experienced what was going on. And then I burst up to the surface, and a rope landed near me, and the boat had stopped. And obviously I grabbed it and they hauled me in. And I thought, at the time I thought, shit. I'm still alive, thank God for that. But as an experience, I used it. And that scene there is basically in my best verbatim as a writer to describe what happened to me. I just turned it into something that happened to that character. There's also a scene, I think it might be in Elite. I can't remember where he used it now. Anyway, there's a scene somewhere in one of my novels. I can't remember who it was, where somebody has fainted and wakes up totally disoriented and doesn't know what's going on because they've been without oxygen for a certain period of time and they're totally disoriented, don't know what's going on. And for a moment, it's like, who am I? What am I doing? What's my name? They can't comprehend what they're seeing. It might be reclamation. I'm not sure. And I wanted to write, that scene. Anyway, somebody's unconscious. They wake up, and they have no idea what's going on. They're totally bemused by, I'm looking at the side of this bulkhead. It's sideways. What's going on? Who am I? What am I doing lying on the floor like this? That is an experience again that happened to me once. I was, actually, I almost pegged it. Let's be honest. I had I've got, as some of you have told on the stream before, I've got a small problem with my heart where some of the electrical connections in my heart don't work properly. So my heart beats half a second out of time, which is a bit weird. Anyway, it's totally fine. It's not life-threatening or anything. But on one occasion, it did effectively misfire, and as a and I'd had some other problems associated with it. And I had basically for a few brief moments, I had a catastrophic loss of blood pressure, instant. Fainted like just like a light had been switched out. Just literally, my wife said I just crashed to the floor, just went down straight away. Okay, she fortunately absolutely kept her head and phoned 999, which is the UK emergency services, and the neighbours came round and everything. And I was out for the count, completely dead to the world. As a result, when I became conscious, I didn't know who I was. It's very, very hard to describe, but basically I couldn't tell which way round I was. My first recollection was, because I was lying on the floor, my wife had sort of rolled me into the recovery position on my side with one arm over and one leg slightly out, and just sort of made sure my airways and things were open, it was basically a reset. True has been reset to factory condition, and I was lying, my head was on the carpet looking across the room, and all I could see was one half of my vision was the carpet, and another one was a chair leg, which of course from the perspective of lying down was sticking out horizontally. And I was looking, and I just remember very distinctly going, who the hell am I? Why am I looking at a chair leg? Why is the carpet at right angles to normality? Why is the chair leg stuck on the carpet? Well, at least that's consistent. Why? I don't think I should be lying like this. This doesn't appear to be right. My brain went through a really, really weird logical reasoning based on only the images it could see. None of my memory was working effectively, other than I seemed to be able to remember how to speak. And I remember very distinctly going through this mental loop of trying to figure out, based on logic and all I could see within the narrow range of my vision, because I couldn't move at that point. I felt like I was totally paralysed. and I remember my brain kind of trying to figure out, well, this is clearly unusual. It was really, really, it was very strange, the process my brain went through to do this. And I used that experience of having gone through that process to inform the novel. Now, I was taken to hospital for observation as a result of having this thing. And then so I was taken in an ambulance, and they strapped things to you and stick tubes in you and all the stuff that they do. So again, as a writer, I was lying there going, okay, my blood pressure might only be 50/40 or whatever. It was really, really bad, low pressure. But I was still taking notes, It's like, okay, so that's what it's like to be in an ambulance. Terrifying my nearest and dearest. But so if you do have an unusual experience, you can use it. Another one that happened to me was I once had a really, really bad stomach pain. I never actually found out what it was, I was at work, fortunately, and I was talking to my boss, and I just said, I'm sorry, I just got this really, really bad pain. I'm going to have to go and lie down if that's right. And he said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. I made it about 2 steps across the carpet and then just basically doubled up in agony. Again, called 999, ambulance turned up. They didn't know what was up with me either, so they started rushing me to hospital with the blues and twos going. And I really was in quite serious pain from whatever it was that was wrong. And so they gave me an injection of morphine. Okay, now I have to tell you, I've never done drugs, but having had some morphine, I can completely understand why people do drugs. Okay, that's not, don't take that as an encouragement to do drugs, for God's sake. But I completely understand why. Okay, I basically, they gave me this morphine, and I think a fairly big dose of morphine, okay, to deal with the pain that I was in, because I was almost, not quite, but almost, getting too close to hysterical due to the pain. It was that bad. It was pretty bad, at a point where I couldn't function, couldn't control myself. And so anyway, morphine, boom, okay, and the morphine, they injected it into my upper arm, and I could feel it moving from my upper arm across my body, and it kind of went into, I could feel it moving down my body, and then it went into my head. I have to say, it was a proper trip to Trip Out City. It really was. The first thing I remember, because I was lying in an ambulance bed, staring up at the roof, and there was a fluorescent light tube in the ambulance. And as I watched, this fluorescent tube just broke into all the colours of the rainbow, and it was a magical thing. It was just sort of like, wow. I'm staring up at this thing, and apparently, conscious thought had deserted me by this point, from my perspective. But apparently, the paramedics did come past about 3 hours later to see how I was, and I'd recovered fine. And she came over and she says we normally get some really quite disturbing thoughts from people who have that kind of dose of morphine. He says, there's usually very unsavoury thoughts that emerge. She says, you were quite different. Yes. What did I do? She said, you gave us this very, 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 very detailed explanation of how the spectrum of light is affected by diffraction. So apparently, for the entire trip down to the hospital, I was lying there talking about electromagnetic wavelengths and diffraction and refraction of light, and how the rainbow is actually a thing. So that's what happens to me when you give me too much morphine. But it really was quite I've never been in a situation where I felt I was totally disembodied from my physical self, and I was just floating in this amazing world of colour and spectral light. Again, have used that in my writing. So when people get hit by some strange space drugs or something like that, it's an experience you can use. So you certainly can use things that have happened to you. You can change the context a little bit and then kind of replay them. So I've done that on several occasions. Yes, close to being drowned. Yep, I'll use that. Close to passing out and dying. Yep, I'll use that as well. And a trippy experience in the back of an ambulance with far too many drugs. Yep, I'll use that one as well. So the things like that you can use. Okay, you can use, which is all good fun. Now that's to say, if you haven't experienced those things, and in many ways I hope you don't you don't experience those things, but you can certainly use any life experience, and bear in mind that your life experiences will be unique to you. Your interpretation of them will also be unique as well. So there will be things that you've experienced that nobody else has. So use those in your writing, because that can make things very, very compelling. I have written a few scenes also where people have died in stories, and I had a couple of people comment again in reviews and things like that. It says, have you actually been with somebody who died? Because I just get the sense from your writing that that's quite a personal thing that you've written, and and it was an interesting comment, quite an insightful one, because that is true. I have been with somebody who's died, and maybe some aspect of that came out in the storytelling as well. So the sum of your experiences can be a very powerful thing to put into your writing if you can use it. So do use that. If you've got something strange that's happened to you, because it may be unique and it may be something that you can share, obviously for your storytelling as well. Things like that can be a lot of fun. The other one, actually, thinking about it, after that event where I passed out on the floor and I suffered some sort of very minor, I won't call it brain damage, because it wasn't brain damage, because it was reversible, but it was kind of like a fit, I suppose. It was that sort of kind of medical trauma. And what happened actually afterwards, for a few days, I wasn't able to read. Now, it sounds strange, but because I could speak and I could talk and I understand English, but I couldn't read. I remember very, very distinctly picking up a book and opening it and just expecting to read and going, like, I can see those are words, but I have no idea what they mean. And for a few moments, I totally panicked, thinking, what on earth has happened to me? I was going to read a story to my son, and he was about, I don't know, sort of 5, 6 at the time, and I couldn't read. I knew what was there because I'd read the book before, so I could kind of read it from memory, but I couldn't actually read the text. I could see there were shapes. It's really, really hard to describe. And as somebody who obviously loves books, it was very disconcerting, and it slowly got better over the course of about 3 days. But for the first 2 days, I couldn't read at all. I could see words, I could recognise shapes of letters, but I didn't know what they meant. And it was part of my brain had kind of reset itself and gone, nope, I've got no memory of that at all. And then it clicked back and fixed itself within a few days, and I was back to normal. But it was a very strange effect, and it just shows how fragile the human mind can be under subject. Could I type? No, I couldn't. Because I was, I'd pick up the keyboard and go, well, there's some shapes, but I don't know what they are, and it was. And my brain was at war with itself, because on one hand it was going, of course you know what they are, you've been reading and writing for years. And then the other part, the actual operational part, was basically, I don't know which one's which. I don't know what these shapes mean. And the other part of you goes, well, you read something last week, so surely it's the same. And then your logical brain was fighting almost with your kind of operational brain, saying, well, of course you can. And then I said, well, I don't know how to. And it went away after a few days. But it was very, very peculiar experience to go through. So what I suppose that's given me is a sense of the fragility of the human mind and how easy it is for that to be subverted. And occasionally I'll use that in my storytelling as well. So I've tried to, if characters... I used it most, actually. That particular instant, I used it with Salome when she first comes out of the pod in Elite Reclamation, with her memory incorrectly restored. How disorientating it is for you as an individual if your memory doesn't work and you can't remember who you are. So I basically just exaggerated that experience again for the perspective of that character. So I've never lost my memory in that sense, but I have lost some of my faculties for a short period of time, and it's very, very, very alarming. It makes you feel, oh my God, what happens if this doesn't come back? What I can never read again. And if you lose more of your memory or more of your capability, like you can't remember your name, or you can't speak, or you can't move something, or whatever it happens to be, you can't remember any events. How much more disorientating can that be? And that panic, that gut clenching panic that you first experience, is something that I've tried to capture in the storytelling. So if you, like I say, if you do have an experience, use it, because it might be quite powerful. It makes the story more powerful if it's rooted in something that actually happened. And I still can't spell. There's some words I still can't spell. I don't think I can blame that particular incident for that. It's just me being totally incompetent. So it was. It's like the phenomenon of people who wake up from a traumatic event and have a different accent and language. Those things do happen. That the human mind is a peculiar thing, and you can play around with that. If your characters, experience a trauma of some kind, whether it's physical or mental, that can have a big impact on their characters as a result. I did that in Shadewood with Zoella. She basically has a mental episode where she, her rage, if you like, and her suppressed hatred is unleashed in a bad way, and it basically sends her into a sort of semi-catatonic state for the early chapters of one of the books, and that again is based on kind of observations of things that actually happen. So your research can very much be your own personal experiences, things that have happened to you. The panic that you might experience if your car breaks down on a dark and lonely, a dark and stormy night, those sort of things, or you miss your train, or the anxiety of meeting somebody for the first time. All those things, if you can capture the emotions and capture the essence of those senses in those scenarios, they can become very powerful little storytelling things. So it doesn't all have to be just go and look things up on the internet as research. Your own experiences can be funneled into your storytelling process and add some flavour. So there we go. But I'm okay now. Well-ish. For anybody wondering, is he still mad? No, he's still mad. But yeah, I'm still good. Anyway, that's probably enough for that topic for tonight. So thank you again very much for your company on that sort of particular one. So I hope that's given you an idea of the sort of things that you might want to consider when you're researching novels, when you're trying to pull bits and pieces together. Do as much as you need to for the purposes of your story. Don't overdo it, because you can get stuck forever in research hell and just keep doing it, right? You need to know when to stop doing the research and start writing the book. That's very important. Ultimately the research is there to serve the purposes of telling the story. So decide how much you need for whatever it is you're trying to do. That'd be quite cool. Anyway, my friends, be good. I will see you later on in the week. We'll get back to No Man's Sky on Thursday, a bit of Narcissism on Friday, back to the retro streaming on Saturday mornings, and then obviously back round here again Mondays as well. Have a fantastic week ahead, and I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you, Drew, says Dr. Quest MD. I think you explaining what you know far better than any of my English teachers did. Greatly appreciate it. That's a pleasure. Thank you very much. On the finishing note, a lot of people ask me, what qualifications do you need to be a writer? Absolutely none at all. Okay, is my answer. My writing qualifications extend to a C grade O level in English literature. That's all I've got, right? So I don't have an A level, I don't have a degree, I don't have a PhD or anything. Just very basic qualifications. I think you need to know how to string a sentence together, so a basic knowledge of punctuation, spelling, and grammar is going to serve you well. But other than that, no, just imagination and hard work. So there we go. The message of this stream tonight is take some drugs. No, it's not, DJ Scooby. You've got entirely the wrong point. Anyway, my friends, be good. See you soon. Take it easy. And I will see you anon. Be good. And as always, right on, my friends. Right on.